"Ma'am, you can't be in here." Lieutenant Bradley Hayes stepped directly into her path, his hand raised like a traffic cop. Lieutenant Commander Emma Reynolds didn't flinch. She simply placed the classified folder back on the table, her movements precise and controlled. The operations room at Naval Air Station North Island hummed with the low static of secure communications. A dozen officers, Navy captains, Marine majors, Air Force colonels, were already settling into their seats around the operational planning table, their conversations dying as they noticed the confrontation unfolding. Hayes's eyes swept over her green flight suit, not lingering on the rank insignia at her collar or the gold aviator wings above her left pocket, but on her face, her hair pulled back in a regulation bun. "Support personnel need to clear the room before the briefing begins," he said, his voice carrying across the space. "This is a classified operational planning session." He hadn't asked her name. He hadn't checked her credentials. He just saw a woman organizing materials, and his mind had made its assumption. Emma finally turned to face him fully, her calm blue eyes meeting his. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Reynolds," she said evenly. "I'm briefing today." "Before we continue, if stories of quiet dignity and unsung heroes resonate with, type respect below. And tell me where you're watching from." This story of Emma Reynolds reminds us that true leadership is earned through action, not assumed through prejudice. I read every comment. Hayes's jaw tightened. He was 26 years old, with the crisp uniform and rigid posture of someone who had memorized regulations but never questioned them. "With all due respect, Commander," he said, the title loaded with skepticism, "I'm going to need to verify your credentials. We've had issues with unauthorized personnel attempting to access classified materials." The accusation hung in the air. Around the table, the other officers shifted uncomfortably. A Marine major leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching with narrowed eyes. A Navy captain at the head of the table set down his coffee cup with deliberate care, the clink of ceramic against wood unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Emma reached into her shoulder pocket and produced her common access card. She held it out to Hayes without a word. He took it, his fingers brushing hers briefly, and studied it with exaggerated thoroughness. His eyes scanned the photo, the rank, the clearance codes, printed in small type along the edge. "LCDR Reynolds," he read aloud, as if announcing a discovery. "Naval Aviation." He turned the card over, examining the magnetic strip. "This indicates you're cleared for secret materials, but this briefing involves top-secret SCI, compartmented information. I'm not seeing the proper endorsements." It was a lie. Her card clearly displayed the TSSCI markings. He was manufacturing obstacles, performing his authority for an audience he imagined was impressed by his diligence. Emma's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, a flash of something ancient and cold, like sunlight on deep water. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, "my clearances are current and appropriate for this briefing. I suggest you verify with the—" "I'll be the judge of what's appropriate," Hayes interrupted. He walked over to a security terminal near the door, where a Marine gunnery sergeant stood watch. The gunny's face was carefully neutral, but his eyes tracked Hayes with the weary patience of someone who had seen this performance before. Hayes slid Emma's card into the terminal reader with unnecessary force. The screen glowed green almost immediately, displaying her full security profile. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression hardening from certainty into stubborn suspicion. "The system shows you're assigned to VFA 213, he said, turning to face her. "The Black Lions. That's a Super Hornet squadron." He paused, letting the implication hang. "What's your actual billet? Maintenance officer? Supply?" The insult was surgical. He wasn't just questioning her presence. He was dismissing the wings on her chest, the uniform she wore, the very idea that she could be what the insignia claimed. Around the room, the temperature dropped several degrees. The Marine major uncrossed his arms, sitting forward. The Navy captain's eyes went hard, but Emma simply looked down at the golden wings sewn onto her flight suit. They were worn at the edges, a gold thread slightly frayed from years of friction against parachute harnesses and survival vest straps. For a moment, the fluorescent-lit operations room faded away. The terminal's hum became the roar of twin General Electric F-414 engines spooling up to full military power. The polished conference table dissolved into the gray steel deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, pitching and rolling in heavy Pacific swells. Emma wasn't standing on carpet. She was strapped into a Navy ejection seat, her gloved hands tight on the controls of her FA-18E Super Hornet as the catapult officer gave the launch signal. 2 seconds. That's all it took. 0 to 165 miles per hour in the span of a single heartbeat. The catapult's brutal acceleration crushing her back into the seat with the force of a car crash. Her vision grayed at the edges, her lungs compressed, her heart hammering against the G-forces. And then release, the howling launch into darkness and spray, the nose dropping toward the black water before she pulled back on the stick, climbing away from the carrier's lights into the vast, empty night. Those wings weren't decoration. They were scars, memory, testament. Commander? Hayes's voice snapped her back to the present. He was holding her CAC card between 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. I asked you a question. What's your actual job? Before Emma could respond, the Marine Major spoke up. Lieutenant, I think you should. Sir, with respect, this is a security matter. Hayes cut him off. I'm authorized to. You're authorized to make an ass of yourself, apparently, the Major said flatly. His name tape read Corwin, and his face was weathered from deployments to places that didn't make the news. He was staring at Emma with an intensity that had nothing to do with skepticism. Corwin had seen her before. Not here. Not in this sterile operations room. He'd seen her 5 years ago, in a very different context. He'd been a captain then, leading a Marine reconnaissance team deep in hostile territory near the Iraqi-Syrian border. They'd been compromised, taking fire from 3 directions, pinned down in a shallow wadi with nowhere to go. And then she had appeared. 2 Super Hornets, call signs Viper 1 and Viper 2, screaming in from the south at 500 knots and 200 feet. Corwin remembered the calm, precise voice on the radio. Reaper 6, this is Viper 1. I have eyes on your position. Mark your friendlies and keep your heads down. He remembered the earth-shaking thunder of the close air support runs, the 20mm cannon fire shooing up the enemy positions with surgical precision, so close he could feel the heat of the brass falling around his position. He remembered the steady stream of updates, the professional detachment in her voice, even as she was pulling 7 gigaseconds and dodging ground fire. Viper 1, he'd radioed back when the firing stopped. You just saved our lives. Just doing the job, Reaper 6. Now get your Marines home. Corwin looked at the patch on Emma's right shoulder, the snarling black lion's head of VFA 213, and below it, smaller but unmistakable, a personal call sign patch, Viper. His blood went cold with recognition and rage. This wasn't some admin officer. This was Viper 1, the pilot who had saved his entire team. The Marine Major pulled out his phone, shielding it with his hand as he typed rapidly. The message was urgent, direct, sent to a contact he knew could fix this disaster before it became irreversible. Admiral Reeves's flag captain. Sir, you need to get to the North Island Ops Room immediately. A JG is trying to eject LCD-R Reynolds, Viper, the one from the Syrian border. The reply came in seconds. Who? Corwin typed back. Viper 1, VFA 213, the pilot who saved Reaper 6. Get him here now. Meanwhile, Hayes was escalating. He'd found his hill, and he was determined to die on it. Commander, I'm going to need you to wait outside while I contact your squadron duty officer to verify your status. He gestured toward the door. Protocol requires. Protocol requires you to shut your mouth, Lieutenant. The voice came from the Navy captain at the head of the table. His name was William Drake, a career surface warfare officer who'd spent 25 years at sea. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Give the commander her card back. Now." Hayes's face flushed. "Sir, I'm following security procedures." "You're following your assumptions," Drake said coldly. "There's a difference. Hand over her credentials and take a seat." "That's not a suggestion." But Hayes had gone too far to retreat. Pride and embarrassment had fused into something toxic. "Captain, with all due respect, if there's even a possibility of a security breach." "The only breach I see is of common sense and military courtesy," Drake interrupted. "That officer has more flight hours than you have days in service. She's briefing us on strike tactics for the Persian Gulf scenario. Now sit down before you make this worse." "Sir, I have a duty." "Your duty is to not be an idiot," the Marine major said, "which you're failing spectacularly." The room had divided into two camps, those who understood what was happening, and Hayes, who was utterly, catastrophically alone in his certainty. The Air Force colonel, a woman with silver hair and an eagle on her shoulder, shook her head slowly. She'd been quiet until now, but she recognized the signs. She'd seen this before, the casual assumption that a woman in a flight suit must be support staff, logistics, public affairs, anything but a combat pilot. "Lieutenant Hayes," she said, her voice carrying the authority of 30 years in uniform, "I'm going to give you some advice. Stop talking. Apologize to Commander Reynolds. And learn from this before you destroy your career in the next 5 minutes." Hayes turned to her, desperation and defiance mixing in his expression. "Colonel, I appreciate your input, but nothing," she snapped. "You see those wings on her chest? Those aren't participation trophies. You earn those by landing a 30-ton aircraft on a moving runway at 150 miles per hour in the dark. You earn those by flying into hostile airspace with people actively trying to kill you. What have you done to earn the right to question her?" The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Hayes opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'm responsible for security in this facility. And you're responsible for the biggest mistake of your military career," the colonel finished. "But you're too proud or too stupid to realize it." Emma had remained silent through the entire exchange, her face a mask of professional composure. But inside, another memory was surfacing, bright and terrible as burning jet fuel. The mission over the Persian Gulf. 3 years ago. A strike package of 6 Super Hornets, tasked with taking out an enemy air defense network that had been harassing coalition aircraft. Emma had been the mission commander, call sign Viper 1, leading the formation into the teeth of the most sophisticated anti-aircraft system outside of Russia. They'd planned it perfectly, timed the ingress to coincide with a feint from the north, calculated the radar coverage down to the meter, loaded their jets with HARMs and JDAMs and enough fuel to get home if everything went wrong. Everything went wrong. 2 minutes from the target, her radar warning receiver lit up like a Christmas tree. An SA-15 surface-to-air missile system, not supposed to be there, not on any of the intelligence briefs. And it had just locked onto Viper 3, her wingman, a young lieutenant on his first combat deployment. Emma didn't hesitate. She broke formation, diving toward the missile site, lighting up her own radar to draw the system's attention. "Viper flight, this is Viper 1. I'm engaged defensive. Continue to target." "Viper 1, you're spiked," her backseater had shouted. "We've got 2 missiles inbound." She'd seen them. White streaks against the brown desert floor, climbing fast, trailing smoke. She'd punched out chaff and flares, yanked the Hornet into a bone-crushing 8G turn, the airframe groaning, her vision tunnelling, her anti-G suit inflating so hard it bruised her legs. The first missile missed by 300 feet. The second one didn't. It detonated 50 feet behind her left engine, peppering the tail with shrapnel. Master caution lights blazed across her cockpit. Engine fire warnings. Hydraulic failures. Flight control degradation. The Hornet bucked and shuddered, trying to roll inverted. "Viper 1 is hit," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the aircraft trying to kill her. Continuing to target. "Emma, we need to egress," her backseater said, using her first name, breaking protocol because they both knew they might be dying. "Negative," she said. "Target in 30 seconds. Stand by weapons release." She flew the crippled Hornet through the attack run, released her ordnance on the SA-15 site, and watched it disappear in a ball of orange fire. Then, and only then, did she turn for home, nursing the damaged aircraft across 200 miles of hostile territory, with one engine shut down and half her flight controls non-responsive. She'd made it back to the Abraham Lincoln on fumes, trapping on the third wire with emergency equipment standing by. When she climbed out of the cockpit, her flight suit was soaked with sweat, her hands were shaking, and the deck crew had stared at the shredded tail of her aircraft in stunned silence. The next morning, the Admiral had pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross to her uniform. For heroism and extraordinary achievement in aerial flight, the citation read. The medal was in a box in her quarters. She never wore it. The memory was burden enough. Hayes wasn't done. He couldn't be done. He'd committed too fully, burned too many bridges. "Look," he said, his voice rising with frustration, "I don't care what anyone thinks. My job is to ensure security compliance, and until I can verify Commander Reynolds' briefing authorization through official channels, she cannot participate in this." The door to the operations room burst open. Everyone in the room came to attention instantly. Chairs scraping, bodies snapping upright. Standing in the doorway was Rear Admiral James Reeves, his 2 silver stars gleaming on his collar. Flanking him were his flag captain and the command master chief, a man whose chest was so dense with ribbons it looked like a combat history textbook. The temperature in the room dropped to absolute zero. Admiral Reeves was not a large man, but he occupied space like a battleship. His face was carved from decades of sea duty and hard decisions, his eyes a pale gray that missed nothing. He swept his gaze across the room, taking in the scene in a single glance. The officers standing at attention, the terrified lieutenant, and Lieutenant Commander Emma Reynolds standing alone by the planning table, her expression carefully neutral. Reeves ignored Hayes completely. He walked past him as if he were furniture, his eyes locked on Emma. The Master Chief followed, his expression thunderous with barely contained rage. The Admiral stopped directly in front of her. The silence in the room was absolute, a physical pressure. For a long moment he simply looked at her, and something unreadable passed across his face. Respect, pride, and perhaps a touch of regret that this moment was necessary at all. Then he smiled. It was a small, tight smile, but genuine. "Viper," he said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room like a rifle shot. "I was beginning to think you decided to skip this briefing. We've been waiting for you." The call sign echoed in the silence. Viper, not Commander, not Reynolds. Her warrior name, her earned identity. The reaction was immediate. Several of the officers who'd been unsure suddenly straightened, recognition dawning. The Marine Major allowed himself a grim smile of satisfaction. The Air Force Colonel nodded slowly, vindication in her eyes. Lieutenant Hayes looked like he'd been struck by lightning. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and swaying slightly. He'd heard stories about Viper. Every junior officer in naval aviation had heard stories about Viper. Admiral Reeves turned to address the room, his voice shifting from quiet respect to command authority. "For those of you who haven't had the privilege," he began, his eyes sweeping over the assembled officers before landing like artillery fire on Hayes. "Allow me to introduce Lieutenant Commander Emma Reynolds." He paused, letting the silence build. Commander Reynolds has over 2 800 flight hours in the FA-18 Super Hornet. She has 847 carrier-arrested landings. For you Air Force and Marine folks, that's like landing a fighter jet on a postage stamp that's moving at 30 miles per hour in the dark in a storm. And she's done it 180 times at night. A low murmur went through the room. Night carrier landings were the most dangerous routine operation in military aviation. The statistics were brutal. 1 fatality per 10,000 landings. Emma had beaten those odds 180 times. 3 years ago, Reeves continued, Commander Reynolds was the mission commander for a strike package targeting an SA-15 air defense network in the Persian Gulf. When her wingman was locked up by a missile system that wasn't supposed to be there, she deliberately drew fire to protect her flight. She took a missile hit, lost an engine and half her flight controls, and still completed her weapons pass on target. Then she flew her crippled aircraft 200 miles back to the carrier and trapped with emergency equipment standing by. The room was utterly still. Every officer was staring at Emma now, seeing her clearly for the first time. The worn wings on her flight suit suddenly made sense. The calm composure made sense. Everything made sense. The Distinguished Flying Cross she was awarded for that mission. Reeves said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, cited extraordinary achievement and heroism in the face of hostile fire. In my opinion, it's the least she deserved. He turned back to Emma, his posture shifting from commander to peer, and brought his hand up in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. Welcome to the briefing, Viper. We need your expertise on the threat assessment scenarios. Emma's back straightened. The weariness in her eyes was replaced by a familiar fire. She returned the salute with equal precision, her movements crisp and sure. Honored to be here, Admiral. The transfer of power was complete. The public vindication was absolute. Admiral Reeves let his gaze fall on Lieutenant Hayes. The young man looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him whole. His face had gone from pale to gray, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. Lieutenant, Reeves said, and Hayes flinched at the word. Report to my office at 1600 hours with your commanding officer. You and I are going to have a very detailed conversation about judgment, professional military bearing, and the Navy's core values of honor, courage, and commitment, which you seem to have misplaced. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet fury was far more terrifying than any shout could have been. Admiral, Emma said, stepping forward slightly. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the humiliation she must have felt. With respect, sir, the lieutenant was attempting to enforce security protocol. His execution was flawed, but the principle of vigilance is sound. Every eye in the room turned to her. She was defending him. After everything, she was defending him. The standard is the standard, Emma continued, looking directly at Hayes. It has to be applied fairly to everyone, every time. Not based on what you think you see, but on what the evidence shows. That's the lesson here. It was a masterclass in grace, under pressure. She wasn't asking for an apology or demanding retribution. She was reinforcing that the institution, the Navy, the standards, the mission, was more important than any individual's ego, including her own. Reeves studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Noted, Commander. However, he turned back to Hayes. The lieutenant will still report to my office. Because while vigilance is commendable, wisdom is required. And today, Lieutenant, you demonstrated a catastrophic lack of both. The Admiral gestured to the planning table. Now, if we're done with this ... distraction ... we have a mission to plan. Commander Reynolds, you have the floor. Emma moved to the head of the table with quiet confidence. She picked up a remote control and activated the large display screen on the wall. A satellite image of the Strait of Hormuz appeared, overlaid with threat rings and engagement zones. Gentlemen, ma'am, she began, her voice clear and authoritative. What you're looking at is the current Iranian integrated air defense network in the Hormuz littoral. As of 48 hours ago, They've deployed 3 new SA-20 sites here, here, and here. She pointed to red circles on the map. This changes our ingress corridors significantly. As she briefed, the other officers leaned forward, taking notes, asking sharp tactical questions. This was her element, not defending her credentials, but sharing expertise earned through years of study, training, and combat. The worn wings on her chest weren't decorations. They were proof of mastery. Hayes remained standing by the door, forgotten now, invisible. He watched Emma command the room with effortless authority, watched admirals and colonels defer to her judgment, watched her break down complex tactical problems with the precision of a surgeon. And he finally understood what he'd done. He'd challenged not just a qualified officer, but one of the Navy's most experienced combat pilots. He'd questioned not just her credentials, but her honor. And he'd done it based on nothing more than his own biases and assumptions. The briefing lasted 2 hours. Emma covered threat assessments, ingress tactics, weapons loadouts, contingency plans for losses, and exit strategies. She spoke with the casual competence of someone who had flown these missions dozens of times, who had looked into the face of death and made calculated decisions while pulling 7 gigaseconds and dodging missiles. When it ended, Admiral Reeves stood and extended his hand. Outstanding brief, Commander. This is exactly the kind of tactical insight we needed. Thank you, sir, Emma said, shaking his hand. Happy to contribute. As the room cleared, the Marine Major approached her. Commander Reynolds, he said quietly, I don't know if you remember, but 5 years ago, near the Syrian border, you provided close air support for a Marine recon team call sign Reaper 6. I was Reaper 6 actual. Emma's eyes widened slightly. I remember that mission. You were in a bad spot. We were about to die, Major Corwin said bluntly. And then you showed up. You and your wingman. You put ordnance danger close, within 50 meters of our position. Perfect accuracy. You saved all 12 of us. He paused. I never got to thank you properly. So, ... Thank you. For my life and the lives of my Marines. Emma's composure finally cracked, just slightly. Her eyes glistened. Just doing the job, Major. I'm glad you made it home. Because of you, he said. Because of you. 3 weeks later, Emma was in the base fitness center, finishing a run on the treadmill. She was in PT gear, her hair pulled back, headphones in, focused on maintaining her pace. The gym was nearly empty at 0600, just a handful of early risers getting their workouts in before the duty day began. She didn't notice Lieutenant Hayes until he was standing next to her treadmill. She pulled out her headphones, hitting the cool-down button. Lieutenant, she acknowledged, her tone neutral. Hayes was in civilian clothes, shorts, and a Navy t-shirt. And without the uniform and rigid posture, he looked younger, smaller. His face was pale, and his eyes were fixed on the floor. Commander Reynolds, he said quietly. Ma'am, I wanted to apologize. What I did in the operations room was inexcusable. It was unprofessional, disrespectful, and completely out of line. I was wrong. He forced himself to look up, to meet her eyes. I made assumptions based on nothing but my own prejudices. And I almost destroyed your reputation in front of your peers. There's no excuse for that. He swallowed hard. And thank you for what you said to the Admiral. You didn't have to defend me. Emma stepped off the treadmill, grabbing her towel. She studied him for a long moment. The shattered pride was obvious, but underneath it, she saw something new, something that hadn't been there before. Humility, the beginnings of wisdom. Lieutenant, she said finally, we all make mistakes. I've made plenty. The difference is what we do after, how we learn, how we grow. Hayes nodded, his jaw tight. I've learned, ma'am. I promise you that. Good, Emma said. Then let me give you some advice. The next time you see someone in uniform, don't see what you expect to see. See what's actually there. See the rank they earned. See the insignia they bled for. See the person, not your assumptions about them. "I will, ma'am," Hayes said. "I swear it." Emma picked up her water bottle, took a drink. "What happened to your security assignment?" "I was moved," Hayes admitted. "Administrative duties now. Reviewing access requests, filing paperwork. The Admiral made it clear that I'm not fit for a position requiring judgment. Not yet." He paused. "But he also said it doesn't have to be permanent. If I can prove I've learned from this." "Then prove it," Emma said simply. "Not to me. Not to the Admiral. To yourself. Be the officer you should have been that day." Hayes nodded, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "I will, Commander. Thank you." Emma gave him a small, tight smile. Then she noticed something. "Lieutenant." He looked up. "Ma'am, tuck your shirt in." Hayes looked down, embarrassed, and quickly fixed his untucked T-shirt. It was a small correction, a tiny detail, but it was also a lesson. Standards matter. Details matter. Discipline matters. As Hayes walked away, Emma watched him go. She didn't know if he'd truly learned from this, if he'd become the kind of officer the Navy needed. But she'd given him the chance. The rest was up to him. She thought about the dozens of young pilots she'd trained over the years. The lessons she'd taught about discipline, about judgment, about the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. Teaching didn't always happen in a cockpit or a classroom. Sometimes it happened in a gym at 0600, with a lieutenant who'd made a catastrophic mistake and was trying to find his way back. The Navy had changed since she joined. More women in combat roles. More recognition that competence had no gender. But the old prejudices still lingered, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for moments of stress or uncertainty to emerge. Emma had fought those prejudices her entire career, not with anger or bitterness, but with excellence, by being so undeniably good at her job that doubt became impossible, by earning every inch of respect, every flight hour, every carrier landing. Those worn golden wings on her flight suit weren't just metal and thread. They were proof, evidence, testament to 1,000 decisions made under pressure, 1,000 landings in the dark, 1,000 moments when failure meant death. She'd earned them, and no one could take that away. 6 months later, Emma stood on the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, watching the sun set over the Pacific. The carrier was at sea, conducting flight operations, and she'd just finished her last trap of the deployment. Number 863, another one for the logbook. Behind her, a young female ensign approached hesitantly. She was fresh out of flight school, newly winged, assigned to VFA 213 as a nugget pilot. Her wings were bright and new, not yet worn by the friction of survival gear and salt spray. "Commander Reynolds?" the ensign said. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say I heard what happened at North Island, what that lieutenant did, and how you handled it." Emma turned to face her. "It was nothing, just a misunderstanding." "No, ma'am," the ensign said firmly. "It wasn't nothing. It was important, because ... She hesitated, then continued. "Because I've had people assume I'm not a pilot, too. That I'm support staff, or a meteorologist, or anything but a combat aviator. And it's exhausting. Always having to prove yourself." Emma nodded slowly. "It is exhausting. But here's what I learned. You don't prove yourself to them. You prove yourself to yourself. You earn your wings by being the best pilot you can be. By mastering your aircraft, by making good decisions under pressure, by bringing your jet and your crew home safe." She gestured to the flight deck, where aircraft were being recovered and launched in a controlled ballet of organized chaos. "This is the standard. The carrier deck doesn't care about your gender. The enemy doesn't care. The aircraft doesn't care. All that matters is competence, skill, discipline. Can you do the job? Can you do it under pressure? Can you do it when lives are on the line?" "Yes, ma'am," the ensign said. I can. Then you'll be fine, Emma said. The prejudice will still be there. The assumptions will still be there. But you'll fly anyway. You'll land on this deck at night, in a storm, with nothing but your training and your courage. And you'll earn these wings every single day. The ensign smiled, confidence replacing uncertainty. Thank you, Commander, for being who you are, for showing us it's possible. Emma watched her walk away, young and determined, carrying the same dreams Emma had carried 15 years ago, the same fears, the same fire. The Navy was changing, slowly, imperfectly, but changing. And pilots like Emma Reynolds, like VIPER, were leading the way, not by demanding recognition, but by earning it. Not by fighting the system, but by being so excellent the system had to change around them. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Another day done. Another trap in the books. Another small victory in a long war against doubt and prejudice. Emma Reynolds walked below deck, her warm wings gleaming in the fading light, ready for whatever came next. To everyone who typed respect and shared where you're watching from, thank you for recognizing those who serve in silence. Subscribe for more stories of unsung American heroes who prove that true greatness needs no announcement. See you in the next one.